The storm moved on, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than the rain ever had, and Ethan Cole stood there for a long second with water still dripping from his sleeves, the torn fabric hanging from his hand like something he should not be holding, like proof of a mistake he had not meant to make. The girl did not run. That was the first thing he noticed. Most would have. Instead, she stayed where she was, breathing uneven, her eyes fixed on the ridge, her body angled not away from him but toward whatever waited above. She knew them. That much was clear. And whatever they believed they had seen mattered more than anything he could say now. Ethan lowered his hand slowly and let the cloth fall into the mud between them, a quiet gesture that felt like it should mean something, though he knew it would not. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant sage, and with it came the faint sound of movement from above, not loud, not rushed, just steady, deliberate, the kind of sound made by people who did not need to hurry. The girl took a step back, then another, her fingers tightening against what remained of her dress, and when she finally spoke, her voice was low, careful, shaped by a language that was not fully his. "You should go." The words landed soft, but there was no uncertainty in them. Ethan glanced toward the ridge again, counting shapes now instead of guessing at them, 1, then 3, then more as his eyes adjusted, each figure spaced just enough to hold a line, not a crowd, not chaos, something organized, something practiced. "I am not leaving you here," he said, his voice steady, though he kept it low, the way a man does when he knows he is already too late to change the direction of things. She shook her head, sharp, immediate. "If you stay, they will not listen." There was no anger in her tone, no blame, just certainty, and that certainty settled into him deeper than any threat could have. He had seen that kind of certainty before, out on the open range, when a storm decided its path and nothing short of the land itself could turn it. Ethan took a step back instead, slow, measured, giving her space, giving himself distance. Though neither of them looked away from the ridge. The first rider appeared not long after, descending the slope with the kind of ease that came from knowing every inch of the land beneath his horse's hooves, followed by another, and then another, until the line that had watched from above began to take shape below. They did not rush him. They did not call out. They simply came forward, quiet and controlled, and that quiet carried more weight than any shout could have. Ethan kept his hands visible, open at his sides, his shoulders loose, the way his father had taught him years ago when dealing with men who valued respect more than words, and he felt the old instinct rise in him, the one that measured distance, counted numbers, calculated outcomes, but he pushed it down before it could take hold. This was not that kind of moment. Not yet. The girl moved then, stepping between him and the approaching riders, her posture shifting from fear to something else, something firmer, though her voice, when she spoke again, carried a strain that had not been there before. She spoke quickly, the words flowing in a language Ethan could not follow, but he understood enough from her tone, from the way her hands moved, from the way she kept herself squarely between him and them. She was not accusing him. She was not thanking him either. She was trying to hold something together that was already starting to break. The lead rider slowed as he reached the bottom of the slope, his horse stopping a few yards short, and for the first time Ethan could see his face clearly, lined with years and marked with something that looked a lot like judgment already decided. The man's gaze moved from the girl to Ethan, then to the torn fabric in the mud, and lingered there just long enough to say everything without a single word being spoken. Ethan felt it then, the shift, subtle but final, like a gate closing somewhere behind him. Out here, a man did not get to explain first. He got seen. And whatever was seen became the truth others carried forward. The man on the horse did not speak right away, and somehow that silence pressed harder than any question could have, settling over the riverbank like a weight that belonged to him and no one else. Ethan held his ground, feet planted in the mud, shoulders square but relaxed, the way a man stands when he has nothing to hide and no words that would change what had already been seen. The girl continued speaking, her voice quick, urgent, her hands moving in small, precise gestures as if she could shape the truth into something visible, something undeniable, but the rider's expression did not shift. His eyes remained on Ethan, measuring, steady, as if time itself did not concern him. One by one, the others formed behind him, not crowding, not pressing forward, just taking their places in a loose line that closed the distance without ever seeming to rush it. Ethan counted again without meaning to, 8 now, maybe 10 just beyond the first line, their presence filling the space with a quiet certainty that did not need numbers to feel overwhelming. The girl stepped closer to the rider, her voice lowering, more controlled now, and for a moment Ethan thought he saw something change in the man's gaze, not softness, not belief, but recognition of her effort. It was brief. Then gone. The rider lifted his hand slightly, not a command, more like a signal that something had already been decided, and the air shifted again, subtle but final. Ethan felt it in his chest before anything else happened, that same closing sensation, like a door sealing shut behind him. He could have spoken then. Could have tried to explain, to tell them about the river, the current, the way the fabric had caught and held her under, but the words felt small even before they formed, too small for what they believed they had seen. Out here, stories did not compete. The first one that made sense was the one that stayed. The girl turned toward him then, her eyes meeting his for the first time since the riders arrived, and there was something in them now that had not been there before, something heavier than fear, something that looked a lot like apology that had no place to land. She shook her head once, barely noticeable, a small motion that carried more meaning than any sentence could have, and Ethan understood it without needing translation. Do not make it worse. Do not fight this. He exhaled slowly, letting his hands drop a little further from his sides, showing empty palms. No threat, no resistance, and the movement drew the attention of the men behind the rider, not in alarm, but in acknowledgement, like they had been waiting to see what kind of man he would choose to be in this moment. The rider's gaze followed the motion, then returned to Ethan's face, searching, not for guilt, but for something else, something harder to name. Respect, maybe. Or the absence of it. The wind moved again, carrying dust across the edge of the bank, and in that quiet, measured space, Ethan made the only choice that still felt like his to make. He stayed still. No reach for the revolver at his hip, no shift of weight that might be mistaken for defiance, just stillness, deliberate and complete. The girl spoke again, softer now, almost a plea, but the rider did not answer her. Instead, he studied Ethan for one long second more, then gave the smallest nod, not to him, not to her, but to the moment itself, and turned his horse slightly to the side. It was not an invitation. It was not forgiveness. It was simply the next step in something that had already begun, something Ethan could feel unfolding without knowing exactly how it would end. The line of riders adjusted with that motion, closing in just enough to guide, not force, and Ethan understood then that whatever came next would not be decided by words, not today. He glanced once at the torn fabric in the mud, already darkening as the water soaked into the ground, already losing its shape, its edges, its meaning, and he realized that the truth of what had happened was fading just as quickly, replaced by something simpler, something cleaner, something easier to carry. Out here, a man could do the right thing and still stand in the wrong place when it mattered most, and Ethan Cole stood there now, knowing that whatever came next would not ask him what he meant, only who he was willing to be when no one believed him. They did not bind his hands, and somehow that made it heavier to walk, as if the absence of force carried its own kind of judgment, one that expected him to understand without being told. Ethan moved when the space opened in front of him, not pushed, not pulled, just guided by the quiet pressure of presence. On either side, the riders forming a loose corridor that led away from the river and up toward the ridge where they had first appeared. The ground shifted under his boots from wet mud to packed earth, then to loose stone, each step sounding louder than it should in the stillness that followed them. No one spoke. Not to him, not to each other. The only sounds were the soft creak of leather, the steady rhythm of hooves behind him, and the wind threading through dry grass that bent and rose again like it had seen all of this before. He kept his gaze forward, though he could feel their eyes on him, not hostile in the way he had known before, but not neutral either. This was something else. Something measured. They were not deciding what he had done. That had already been decided. They were deciding what kind of man stood in front of them now. The girl walked a few steps behind him, no longer between him and them, her presence shifted from shield to witness, and that change did not go unnoticed. Ethan felt it without turning, the way a man feels when something important moves out of reach. The ridge leveled out into a wide stretch of land marked by scattered stones and low brush, the kind of place that did not belong to anyone but still carried the weight of many footsteps over time. They stopped there. Not all at once, but gradually, the line tightening into a half circle that faced inward, leaving Ethan standing at its center without ever being touched. The lead rider remained mounted for a moment longer, then dismounted with a slow, deliberate motion that drew every eye without needing to command it. He stepped forward, closing the distance until he stood a few feet away, close enough for Ethan to see the fine lines around his eyes, the kind that come from years of watching more than speaking. The man said something then, a single sentence in his own language, low and even, and though Ethan could not understand the words, he understood the weight behind them. It was not a question. It was not an accusation. It was a statement, something that settled into the space like a marker placed in the ground. The girl answered quickly, stepping forward now, her voice steady despite the tension that had not left her shoulders. She spoke longer this time, her hands lifting slightly as if to shape her meaning in the air, and for a brief second, Ethan thought he saw the man's gaze shift again, not in agreement, but in consideration. The wind picked up, carrying dust across their boots, and the moment stretched thin, balanced between two outcomes that neither side could fully control. Ethan kept his hands open, his posture unchanged, though the instinct to speak pressed against his chest, urging him to break the silence, to offer something, anything that might bridge the distance between what he knew and what they believed. He did not. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he understood, in that quiet way that comes only when there is no room left for mistakes, that words here would not carry the weight they needed to. The man in front of him studied him one last time, then stepped slightly to the side, not turning away, just shifting his position enough to change the shape of the space between them. It was a small movement, but it carried meaning. This was not the end. This was the beginning of something else. Ethan felt it settle in his bones, the realization that whatever came next would not be about what had happened by the river, not directly. It would be about what he chose to do now, standing in the middle of a circle that did not need to close any tighter to hold him there. The girl lowered her hand slowly, her voice fading as she finished, and for the first time since the river, she looked at him without fear, without apology, just with a quiet understanding that seemed to ask the same question the others were asking without words. Who are you when the truth is not enough? Ethan Cole stood there, dust gathering at his boots, the sky clearing above them, and chose the only answer he had left. He remained still. The man's gaze did not leave Ethan, but his attention shifted in a way that was almost invisible, like a weight moving from one side of a scale to the other, and with it came a quiet signal that passed through the circle without a word being spoken. One of the riders stepped forward, not quickly, not aggressively, just enough to close the space. By a few feet, and Ethan understood then that whatever this was, it had moved past watching and into something else. The girl spoke again, her voice tighter now, her words shorter, as if she was running out of time to be heard, but the man did not look at her this time. His eyes remained fixed on Ethan, searching for something that could not be explained, only shown. The wind settled, leaving the air still, and in that stillness, every small movement became louder than it should have been, the shift of a boot against dirt, the soft brush of fabric, the steady breath of men who had learned patience long before they learned anything else. Ethan felt the moment narrow, the world around him pulling inward until there was nothing left but the space between him and the man in front of him, and the choice that had been waiting since the river rose up again, clear and simple. He could speak. He could try to force the truth into words, to push against what they believed with what he knew. Or he could let the moment stand as it was, unaltered, and accept whatever came with it. His hand hovered for the briefest second near his side, not reaching for anything, just reacting, instinct pulling against decision, and he stopped it before it became something else. That was the line. Not the circle around him. Not the men watching. That small movement, that almost choice, that was where everything could turn. He let his hand fall back to stillness. The rider who had stepped forward paused, watching that motion closely, then looked to the man at the center for direction. It came in the smallest form, a slight tilt of the head, a permission that did not need to be repeated. The rider moved again, closing the distance enough to stand just off to Ethan's side, not touching him, not restraining him, but making it clear that the space he occupied was no longer entirely his own. The girl's voice broke through once more, softer now, not urgent, not pleading, just steady in a way that carried something deeper than fear. She spoke a single sentence this time, and though Ethan did not understand the words, he felt the shift it caused, subtle but real, like a stone dropped into still water. The man finally looked at her then, really looked, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with Ethan, something older, something rooted in trust that had been built long before this moment. It lingered for a second, then faded, and when his gaze returned to Ethan, it had changed. Not softened. Not hardened. Just clearer. The decision had been made. The man stepped back, not away, but into a position that placed him beside the others, no longer directly in front, and with that movement, the shape of the circle shifted again, opening slightly in one direction, creating a path that led away from the ridge and down toward the open land beyond. It was not an order. It was not a command. It was an expectation. Ethan looked at that space for a moment, then back at the man, then at the girl, who met his eyes without hesitation this time. There was no fear in her expression now. No apology either. Just a quiet certainty that whatever came next was already set in motion. Ethan drew a slow breath, the kind a man takes when he knows he is stepping into something he cannot control, and moved. Not because he was forced. Not because he was told. But because standing still any longer would have meant refusing the only path left open to him. The riders adjusted as he walked, falling into place around him again, not closing in, just present, guiding without pressure, and the land stretched out ahead, wide and empty under a sky that had cleared too quickly, as if the storm had never been there at all. Behind him, the river kept moving, carrying away what had happened, leaving only what remained in the eyes of those who had seen it. Out here, a man did not get to choose how he was judged. Only how he walked when judgment came. They walked for what felt longer than it should have, though the sun had barely shifted in the sky, and the land stretched wide in every direction, open and honest in a way that made a man feel smaller the farther he went into it. Ethan kept his pace steady, neither slow nor hurried, matching the quiet rhythm that had formed around him, the riders moving with him rather than against him, their presence constant but never pressing. It was a strange kind of escort. One that did not demand obedience yet allowed no deviation, and after a while, Ethan understood that the destination was not a place so much as a moment they were all moving toward together. The ground leveled out again near a shallow rise where the grass grew thinner and the soil turned pale, marked by old stones set in no pattern he could recognize but placed with purpose all the same. This time, when they stopped, it happened all at once. No gradual tightening, no shifting positions. Just stillness. The riders remained mounted except for the man who had led them from the beginning, and the girl, who stepped forward before anyone else could move. She turned to Ethan fully now, standing close enough that he could see the faint tremor in her hands, though her voice, when she spoke, did not carry it. "You should have left," she said, the words clearer this time, her English shaped carefully, each one placed where it belonged. Ethan studied her face, searching for something that might tell him what waited on the other side of this moment, but all he found was that same quiet certainty he had seen before. "You told me to go," he answered, his tone even, not defensive, not challenging, just stating what had been. She nodded once. "And you did not." There was no accusation in it. Just fact. The man stepped forward then, closing the distance until he stood between them, not blocking, not separating, just placing himself where both could be seen at once. He spoke again in his own language, slower this time, the cadence deliberate, as if each word carried weight that needed to settle properly before the next one could follow. The girl listened, her gaze lowering slightly, then lifted again when he finished, and for the first time since the river, she did not answer immediately. The pause stretched, filled only by the wind brushing across the dry grass, and Ethan felt the shape of the moment shift once more. This was not about what had happened anymore. This was about what came after. The man turned his attention back to Ethan, and though he still had not spoken a word Ethan could understand, the meaning behind his presence had become clear in a way that did not require translation. This was a test. Not of strength. Not of skill. Of something quieter. Something harder to see. Ethan stood where he was, the weight of it settling into him slowly, and let his shoulders relax just enough to show he was not bracing for anything, not preparing to resist, just present. The man watched him for a long second, then reached down to the ground beside him and picked up a small object, something Ethan had not noticed before, half buried in the pale soil. It was a strip of cloth, weathered, faded, its edges worn by time and weather, and for a moment Ethan did not understand why it mattered until the man held it up between them. Fabric. Torn once. Preserved. The girl's eyes flicked to it, then back to Ethan, and something unspoken passed between them, something that bridged the distance between what had happened and what was being asked now. The man extended the cloth slightly, not offering it, not giving it, just holding it there as if it represented something larger than itself. Ethan did not reach for it. He did not step forward. He simply looked at it, then back at the man, then at the girl, and in that stillness, he made the same choice he had made by the river. He did not try to take control of the moment. He let it stand as it was. The wind shifted again, lifting the edge of the cloth just enough to catch the light, and the man lowered it slowly, his gaze never leaving Ethan's face. Something in that gaze changed then, not enough to name, not enough to claim, but enough to feel. The test was not over. But it had moved. And Ethan Cole stood there, saying nothing, doing nothing, letting the truth of who he was settle in a place where words had already failed. The cloth lowered, and with it, something in the air seemed to settle, not resolved, not finished, but shifted just enough to change the direction of what came next. The man stepped back into place among the others, and for the first time since the river, the circle loosened in a way that did not feel like a test anymore. It felt like a decision. The girl glanced at Ethan once, a brief look that held no fear now, only a quiet acknowledgement, then turned away as the riders began to move again, not around him. This time, but away from him. One by one, they turned their horses toward the open land, their silhouettes stretching long across the pale ground as the sun dipped lower, and within a few seconds, the space that had been so tightly held around Ethan began to empty. No command was given. No explanation followed. They simply left. Ethan stood where he was, watching them go, the wind brushing past him like it had before the storm, like nothing had happened at all, and for a moment, he considered calling out, asking something, anything that might make sense of what had just taken place, but the words never came. Out here, silence had a way of answering before a man could form the question. He waited until the last rider disappeared over the rise, until even the faint sound of hooves had faded into the distance, and only then did he turn back toward his ranch. The walk felt longer this time, though he knew it was the same distance, the same ground beneath his boots, but something in him had changed, something that made each step carry more weight than before. By the time he reached the fence line, the light had softened into that quiet hour before dusk, when everything looks still and nothing moves unless it has to. From a distance, the place looked the same. The small house. The barn leaning slightly to the west. The fence posts he had repaired just days ago. But as he got closer, the details began to shift. A gate left open that he knew he had closed. Tracks in the dirt that did not belong to his horses. Too many of them. Fresh. Ethan slowed, his eyes scanning the ground, reading the story written there the way he had learned to read the land itself. For riders, maybe 5, had come through while he was gone, their horses heavier, their stride less careful, cutting across his property like it belonged to them. He moved forward, not rushing, but no longer at ease, his hand resting near his side, not on his revolver, just close enough to remind himself it was there. The house came into full view, and that was when he saw them. Men he recognized, though he had not expected to see them here, not today. One stood near the porch, his hat low, his posture relaxed. In a way that was not earned, while another circled the barn, running a hand along the wood as if measuring something. They did not look surprised to see him. In fact, the man by the porch smiled slightly, like he had been waiting. "Took you long enough, Cole," he called out, his voice carrying easy across the yard, too easy for a place that was not his. Ethan stopped just short of the gate, his gaze steady, taking in the scene without letting it show on his face. The open gate. The tracks. The men. It fit together too cleanly to be chance. "You are a long way from town," Ethan said, his voice calm, even though his mind was already moving ahead, placing pieces where they belonged. The man tipped his hat slightly, a gesture that held no respect behind it. "Business has a way of traveling," he replied, glancing around the ranch as if it were already his to consider. "And word travels faster. Heard you got yourself into some trouble by the river." Ethan did not answer. He did not need to. The man's smile widened just enough to show he had been hoping for that silence. "Funny thing about stories," he continued, taking a slow step forward. "They change depending on who tells them. And out here, people tend to believe the version that makes the most sense." He paused, letting that settle, then added, "Softer now, especially when it comes from the right place." Ethan felt it then, the connection forming, the shape of something larger than a misunderstanding, something that reached from the river to his own front door. This had not happened by accident. And whatever had been set in motion out there had followed him home. The man's words lingered in the air longer than they should have, settling into the quiet space between them like dust that refused to fall, and Ethan Cole stood there just inside the gate, not moving, not reacting, letting the weight of it reveal itself without rushing to meet it. The others spread out without being told, one near the barn, one by the well, another circling wide as if measuring the land by footsteps alone, and it was that casual certainty that said more than anything else. They had not come to ask. They had come to take. The man on the porch watched Ethan the whole time, his expression easy, almost friendly, but his eyes held something sharper, something that did not belong to a man making a simple visit. "You always were slow to see the bigger picture," he said, adjusting his hat slightly, his tone carrying that practiced calm of someone who believed the outcome had already been decided. "But that is all right. Makes things easier for the rest of us." Ethan's gaze shifted once across the yard, taking in the fence line, the barn door left half open, the water bucket tipped just enough to show it had been moved, small things, but enough to tell him how long they had been here. Not long. Just long enough. He looked back at the man. "You crossed my land without asking," he said, his voice even, not raised, not sharpened, just placed where it needed to be. The man smiled slightly, stepping down from the porch with a slow, deliberate motion, boots hitting the ground with a soft thud that seemed louder than it should have been. "Land is a funny thing," he replied, glancing around again as if considering it for the first time. "Belongs to whoever can hold it. And from what I hear, you might not be in a position to hold much of anything right now." He let that sit, watching Ethan closely, waiting for something, a reaction, a denial, anything that might give him leverage. Ethan gave him nothing. The wind moved through the yard, lifting a bit of dust along the fence line, carrying with it the faint echo of the river miles away, and for a moment, the silence stretched long enough to feel like a standoff without anyone reaching for it. "Word is," the man continued, softer now, almost conversational, "you got yourself on the wrong side of people who do not take kindly to misunderstandings." He paused, letting the word hang there, then added, "And when a man stands alone out here, well, stories have a way of deciding his fate for him." Ethan's eyes narrowed just slightly, not in anger, but in recognition. This was not chance. This was timing. Someone had seen the river. Someone had carried that version of the story faster than truth could follow. And these men had been waiting for exactly that. "You spoke to them," Ethan said, not a question, just a statement placed where it belonged. The man's smile did not change, but something in his posture shifted, a small acknowledgement without giving anything away. "I speak to a lot of people," he said lightly. "Some listen. Some do not. But the right words, they travel." He stepped closer now, closing the distance by a few feet, not threatening, just confident in a way that did not need to show force. "Here is how this goes," he continued, his voice low enough that it did not carry beyond the two of them. "You sign over this place. Walk away clean. No trouble follows you. Or," he let the word trail off, glancing briefly toward the open land beyond the fence, "you stay, and you find out just how heavy a story can get when enough people decide it is true." Ethan did not look away. He did not move. The offer hung there, simple on the surface, but built on something far deeper than land or fences or cattle. It was built on isolation. On reputation. On the idea that a man alone could be shaped by what others said about him until there was nothing left to stand on. The wind shifted again, and this time it carried something else with it, faint at first, barely noticeable, but enough to touch the edge of Ethan's awareness. A sound. Distant. Rhythmic. Hoofbeats. Not one. Not two. More. He did not turn. Not yet. He kept his eyes on the man in front of him, watching as that easy confidence flickered for the briefest second, as if something unseen had just entered the edge of his understanding. The man's head tilted slightly, listening now, the same way Ethan had learned to listen to the land, and the silence between them changed shape once more. Out here, a story could travel fast. But sometimes, the truth rode faster. The sound grew clearer with every second, no longer something imagined at the edge of hearing but something real, something moving across the land with purpose, and this time Ethan did not need to turn to know what it was. The man in front of him heard it too. The shift in his posture gave it away first, that easy confidence tightening just enough to reveal the uncertainty beneath it, his head turning slightly toward the open range as if he could measure distance by sound alone. The others paused where they stood, their movement stopping mid-task, attention drawn outward, not by command, but by instinct. Hoofbeats carried across dry ground in a steady rhythm, not rushed, not scattered, but unified, like a single intention stretched across many riders. Ethan remained still, his gaze steady, his breathing even, the same way he had stood by the river, the same way he had stood in the circle, because out here, the moment before something revealed itself was often more important than the reveal itself. The man stepped back half a pace, not enough to show fear, just enough to adjust, and that small movement told Ethan everything he needed to know. This was not part of his plan. The first riders appeared over the low rise beyond the fence line, their silhouettes cutting against the fading light, one, then three, then more, forming a line that did not break as they moved forward. They did not spread out. They did not rush. They rode as one, and that alone carried more weight than numbers ever could. The man by the porch exhaled slowly, his eyes narrowing now, recalculating, searching for control that was no longer his to claim. "You called them?" he asked, though the question lacked the certainty it had before. Ethan did not answer. He did not need to. The riders reached the fence and stopped, not crossing, not pressing forward, just holding their position with a stillness that mirrored the one Ethan had chosen earlier that day. The leader stepped forward then, the same man from the river, his presence unchanged, his gaze moving across the yard once, taking in the men, the open gate, the tracks in the dirt, and finally settling on Ethan. For a long second, nothing moved. Then the girl stepped into view beside him, her posture steady, her eyes clear, and this time when she spoke, her voice carried across the yard without hesitation. She spoke in English, each word placed carefully, not rushed, not softened. "He saved me," she said. The sentence was simple. It did not try to explain. It did not defend. It simply existed. The wind moved through the yard, lifting dust at their feet, and the weight of that truth settled into the space between everyone present. The man near the porch said nothing at first, his gaze shifting from her to Ethan, then to the riders behind her, measuring, calculating again, but this time there was no version of the story that worked in his favor. The leader spoke next, his voice low, steady, the same tone he had used before, but this time the meaning was clear even without understanding every word. He was not asking. He was stating. The riders behind him did not move, did not reach for anything, did not threaten. They simply stood, and in that stillness, the balance of the moment shifted completely. The man on Ethan's land adjusted his hat again, a small gesture that no longer carried the same confidence, and after a long pause, he stepped back, then another, the decision made without needing to be spoken aloud. One by one, the others followed, their presence receding from the yard the same way it had arrived, leaving only the marks of their boots and the silence that followed. No victory was claimed. No words of warning were given. They simply left. The leader remained a moment longer, his gaze returning to Ethan, and for the first time, there was something there that had not been before. Not apology. Not quite gratitude. Something quieter. He reached into his hand and revealed the strip of cloth once more, then stepped forward and placed it on the fence post beside Ethan, the fabric catching the last light of the day. "Seen," he said, the single word carrying more meaning than anything else that could have been spoken. Then he turned, mounted his horse, and rode with the others into the fading horizon. Ethan stood there long after they were gone, the land settling back into itself, the wind moving as it always had, and his ranch standing where it had always been. He looked at the cloth on the fence, then out toward the open range, and let out a slow breath. Out here, justice did not arrive with noise. It arrived when the truth found its way home. In a land shaped by silence and dust, a lone rancher finds himself at the center of a misunderstanding that could cost him everything, after saving the daughter of an Apache chief from a raging river only to be judged by what others believed they saw. This emotional journey captures the spirit of Western stories where truth is often buried beneath perception, and where a man must prove his character without words, as the cowboy walks through a quiet trial among warriors who value honor above explanation. The story unfolds with deep moral tension, showing how restraint can speak louder than force in the world of Western stories. When he returns to his isolated ranch, he faces a new threat from men who exploit rumors and twist narratives to seize what is not theirs, proving that in Western stories, danger does not always come from the wild but from those who manipulate it. Yet, as the truth travels across the open plains, the native chief and his daughter return not with anger but with clarity, restoring balance in a way only Western stories can portray, where justice arrives without noise and dignity stands above all. This powerful tale of a white rancher and an Apache woman highlights themes of misunderstanding, honor, and redemption, reminding us that in the harsh world of Western stories, a man is not defined by what others say, but by what he chooses to do when no one believes him.